Hi, and thanks for tuning in for this episode of the GoodCourse EDI Leaders Vodcast. In today's session, we welcome Professor Louise Mullany, Professor of Social Linguistics at the University of Nottingham. Today, we're focusing on sexual harassment in the workplace, looking into how big the problem is, how it manifests itself in today's world, and what businesses can do to tackle it. So Louise, thanks for joining us. Could you please give our listeners an intro to yourself and all the awesome work that you do?
Hi, Chris. Thanks very much for inviting me to be part of the vlogcast. So my area of research looks at gender and issues of diversity and equality in the workplace. So I'm a linguist by trade. So I spend a lot of time looking at how people communicate with one another in the workplace and what happens when things go wrong. So what happens when sexual harassment occurs or something that happens that's either verbal or physical or a combination of the two, that means that issues arise in the workplace that then need to be addressed by workplace authorities themselves.
Fantastic. And I understand, given we've worked together in the past, you're currently writing a book. Do you want to share a bit on that?
Yes, I am. So I'm currently writing a book on politeness, which is, again, another area that I've looked at for over the last 25 years. And it intersects really well with issues of gender and equality. Also looking at things like social class, race, ethnicity, and a whole range of other intersectional areas of our identity. And it's looking at how we communicate with one another and how it's governed by politeness rules and how it's governed by the ways in which we may stereotype or the myths that we may have about language and politeness. So, for example, there's a stereotype that women are more polite than men, and that is quite abundant in popular culture. However, when the research evidence is looked at, there's a lot more similarities between the way that men and women speak and the different ways in which they use politeness. But the real issue is that if women aren't polite, then it tends to be more stigmatized, so more socially stigmatized. So there will be comments that people are being very rude or not being very ladylike. So one of the areas that I'm writing at the moment is looking at swearing and looking at history of swearing, how swear words have changed over time, but how it's much more stigmatized for women to swear than men, and what the consequences of that can be in a range of different situations, including the workplace and lots of other settings where your professional identity is on display. So very much looking at things from the perspective of power, social inclusion, social exclusion, and the role that politeness and then impoliteness can play as part of that.
Wow, well, fantastic summary. That sounds fascinating. I'll have to add it to the reading list when it's ready to be shared. So very excited for that. Obviously, today we're here to talk about sexual harassment in the workplace in particular. But before we dive in, it'd be good if you could give us a bit of context on kind of how big the problem is and the impact that societal attitudes have on the manifestation of harassment in the workplace.
So I think a really good starting point is the Government Equalities Office published a report in 2020 looking at the issue of sexual harassment in the workplace. And I think there is a kind of perception that always that's not a problem anymore, or it's something that's been resolved by diversity and inclusion issues. However, what's come through very clearly from evidence from the Government Equalities Office and a range of other reports, the findings are very consistent, is that sexual harassment still is a really prominent big issue that's causing people to leave workplaces, that's affecting people's health and their well-being. It's affecting their ability to do their jobs properly. So it's therefore affecting businesses at every level, including the level of economic productivity, but also in terms of being able to get the best out of their workforce and in terms of being able to create good, strong, cohesive workplace teams. So it's an issue that is a lot more prominent than is perceived in popular culture. We're also aware of the fact that issues such as sexual harassment are consistently underreported. So all indications point to the fact that the instances are probably much higher even than the statistics are bearing out. But if we think that the Government Equalities Office in 2020 said that 29% of people experience sexual harassment in the workplace, that's really high. And that shows us that there's a significant social problem that exists there. And there's a problem that needs needs to be addressed by everybody in the workplace. There's a problem with awareness, there's a problem with workplace cultures, and there's also an issue with reporting as well. So who do you go to, and how do you ensure that you're going to be taken seriously if something has happened to you? So all of these are part of a much broader social issue that workplaces now have a role to fulfill, and they have a responsibility to all of the people that are employed within any firm to make sure that these issues are taken very seriously, and that the mechanisms are in place to be able to address these effectively.
Definitely. I think you touched on a number of really interesting points there. I suppose in particular the part around the part around the kind of survey results with regards to the large percent of people who reported experiencing some form of sexual harassment, and how obviously that number probably is underrepresenting the reality. I guess, why do you think there's such a gulf in perception, given that I think many people anecdotally don't see this as a big issue?
I think that the gulf comes from the fact that a lot of the time, what is classified as sexual harassment legally is seen as normal behaviour, and it's seen as a workplace norm. So it's not identified as something that should be called out. So, for example, a lot of academics, legal professionals think about anything to do with what we're talking about here, if we take it as gender-based violence as an overall overarching concept. Think about this on a pyramid, and at the bottom of the pyramid you've got attitudes and beliefs. So a dominant one, say for example, would be sexism here, and the pyramid then builds up, and you've got different levels to this pyramid. And the idea behind the pyramid is the more that's normalized in society, the more likely the pyramid is to escalate. And at the top of the pyramid, you've got physical expressions of violence. You've then got, right at the very top, you've got rape, death, kind of homicide, the real, obviously very, very serious crimes that we're talking about. But the idea behind the pyramid is that what's at the bottom then legitimizes what's at the top. So a lot of the reasons why this isn't being called out is because workplace cultures are still thinking that this kind of thing is acceptable. But then when you talk to the people on the receiving end who are experiencing harassment, whether it's racism, xenophobia, transphobia, homophobia, whatever it happens to be, the issues are significant for them, and the damage that's being caused to them is affecting their ability to do their job, but also their desire to actually go into the workplace in the first place. And I think one of the most telling statistics that came through in the Government Equalities Report was that a lot of this sexual harassment is taking place in the physical location of the workplace. Now, of course, it was published in 2020, so it's pre-COVID. And I think what's interesting to think about now, and something that was picked up on in the report, is that this isn't just taking place face to face. It's something that can also take place online. It can take place on your personal mobile. It's something that's much, much deeper than just, something that takes place and then stops immediately as you walk out of the workplace. It's something that can be with you 24/7, which again is something incredibly significant, and employers need to take responsibility here.
No, absolutely. I think what you described with regards to the pyramids and the kind of attitudes and beliefs at the lower end that then normalise different behaviours or different even comments, language, etc., that escalates up the pyramids is a really good way of helping our listeners understand the importance of the seemingly lower level stuff, and actually how that is in of itself the root cause of a lot of the stuff that comes beyond. I guess the next kind of obvious question really is, given in particular a lot of these instances happen within the physical or nowadays digital workplaces, what can and should companies be doing about it?
I think making sure that everybody knows how to define it first and foremost, so they know what's acceptable and what's not acceptable. And quite often you'll get pushback that workplaces are trying to kill humour or to kill banter, and that these things shouldn't be taken seriously. But if people are being affected by this, and people are being subject to sexist remarks or remarks about their appearance, or a combination of their gender, sexuality, race, whatever it happens to be that's being focalized on here, that is affecting their performance at work, then this is something that needs to be called out. But workplaces and employees need to know where the boundaries are. And I think there's almost like a kind of fear culture that's starting to emerge, that people are scared about saying the wrong thing, and having open and honest conversations of where boundaries are and where people feel comfortable are is really, really important. Different workplace cultures will have different types of humour, different ways of telling jokes. And it's really important that this isn't seen as a way of killing off humour or of a way of trying to, I guess, make everything humorless and make, the workplace somewhere where you just go to work. That's not what's being talked about here. This is harassment. This is something that's illegal behaviour and something that really needs to be addressed. And too often it's kind of dismissed as, you're just trying to kill off the fun parts of work. And so that level of understanding and employers being very clear and having very clear and open, honest conversations as part of training or workshops is, really significant in terms of getting that base level of understanding of where your boundaries lie within your workplace and within your workplace culture, and where, people should feel that they can call people out.
100%. I think what you touched on there with regards to the pushback was often felt with regards to maybe the workforce or employees contesting that banter and fun is being killed by essentially overly PC policies and training, right? I think what we often find working with various companies is making the kind of like awareness raising and training very relatable, and also often about perspective sharing. So like, whilst you might think that saying these sort of comments or these sort of jokes are just banter, actually here's a really emotive way to hear it from the perspective of the person receiving it. And actually how, if that's the third time that day alone that someone's commented on their look or appearance that they don't want, and that's the 10th time this week, that's a thing that quite quickly becomes a very damaging thing to happen, despite you thinking as the perpetrator that it's I guess just banter, right?
And I think it's important that it's not just looking at humour. It's that idea of the gateway again. That's one level. Listening to stories from other people's perspectives can be incredibly powerful and incredibly eye-opening, because sometimes this is totally unconscious. It's not intended to be sexist, or it's not intended to come across as harassment, but the victim is viewing it as a form of harassment. And then the higher up the pyramid you go, the clearer it becomes about perpetrators' roles. So, if it's verbal expressions, verbal abuse, if it's, going beyond what can be construed as a joke, it becomes, much, much more significant. Then you've got, the acceleration to, physical contact, groping, flashing, all of those kind of crimes that then facilitate, as we've talked about, the top end of the pyramid as well. So it's making people aware of the kind of escalation and that idea that one is a gateway to another, but also that if you value your workforce and you value the people that work with you, then you need to look after everyone, and you need to make sure that people feel properly respected and properly taken care of in the workplace.
100%. I suppose a related question with regards to what people can do about it, looking now at the individual rather than the institution. Think about the kind of, I think probably fair to say, hopefully millions of well-intended employees working across, companies across this country and well beyond, who perhaps often might witness things that don't seem overtly, categorically 100% wrong, but seem very much in the grey area. What sort of things would you kind of recommend with regards to what individuals, all of us, can do to perhaps be a small part of change in the solution?
I think that we all have a responsibility to each other, people around us who we work with. And quite often when we've looked at language and linguistic analysis, say of business meetings, for example, you can see things like people not getting credit for their own ideas. And one of the really interesting ways in which that can be changed and challenged is if other people call it out. So we've all got that responsibility to be active bystanders and to think, actually, is that person okay with that? I'm not sure they're okay. To check in on people, to have that level of empathy where you think, oh, I'm not the target of the jokes. Good. Don't think like that. Think, actually, is that person okay? do I feel comfortable enough to call out this behaviour? And quite often when you do have these open conversations with one another, you'll find out that workplace colleagues, the majority of people feel really uncomfortable, but don't feel like they have the power to challenge the person who is the one that's initiating sexist jokes or getting too close to people or making people feel really uncomfortable and that they're being treated inappropriately, as a consequence of the fact that, that they occupy a particular gender role within an organisation or a perceived role within an organisation. So everybody has responsibility here, and people really need to work together. And I think one of the reasons why underreporting is so commonly found in statistics, whether you're looking at domestic violence or serious sexual assault or rape, underreporting is there. It's that kind of fear that you won't be taken seriously, or that you won't be believed, or that people will say that you can't take a joke, or that you can't take it, so you therefore don't fit in the culture. And the more people that are aware of what's going on and take that level of responsibility and think, actually, do you know what? This isn't right. That idea of peer-to-peer learning is so important and so powerful that's where change can really come from. So it's about having really good training, which opens up honest conversations with groups and teams within different workplaces to say, actually, we don't want to be having this anymore. This isn't acceptable. It's the 21st century, the second decade of the 21st century. We should be moving beyond this now. We should be, having much more respect and not be having to deal with these issues, to the extent that the statistics are showing us. It's still a massive, massive problem.
100%. I appreciate that. Going to move then, Louise, to the last quick fire questions we end every podcast with. And in particular today, you've shared a bunch of great insights and advice already. But if you wanted people to remember just 3 things, what advice would you give?
Okay, then, so my 3 takeaways are: don't accept that it's just banter. It's not just banter. If you feel uncomfortable and you feel intimidated and you feel that somebody is treating you inappropriately, telling inappropriate jokes or belittling you or making you the figure of fun, then you have a right to call that out. That is harassment, and that is something that you should stand up for. The second point, which is a follow-on to that, is work together. So look out for one another in the workplace, have those conversations and make sure that you're taking care of one another. Particularly, I think if you can find male champions in the workplace and open up those conversations involving men fundamentally in this, it is the way where this is really you're going to see significant change. Have champions, have allies, have people that you can talk to and work together to find solutions. And then finally, don't forget the pyramid. I think the pyramid is one of the most powerful ways that you can envisage what's happening. Don't just dismiss things because you think, oh, that's just, it's just a joke, or it's just this, or it's just a bit of touching, or it's just somebody not knowing what my boundaries are. It's not. And the pyramid starts with attitudes and beliefs. It then goes to microaggressions. It then moves up to verbal expressions, physical expressions, and then you get the very, very serious crimes taking place. It's borne out by so much evidence that pyramid is the bedrock, and it is the gateway to all of those, terrible things that do happen. So be aware of it, have it in the back of your mind. The microaggressions, the smaller stuff, it's really important because it leads to bigger things.
Well, thanks, Louise, for sharing those insights and those really useful, tangible takeaways too. Well, that's it for this episode of the GoodCourse EDI Leaders Vodcast. Thanks for listening, and stay tuned for the next one.